Clark Ashton Smith's Symposium of the Gorgon, a masterful blend of satire and fantasy, made its debut in fantastic universe science fiction in October 1958. Published relatively late in Smith's career, the story showcases his enduring talent for crafting bizarre and imaginative narratives, even as his output had begun to wane. The appearance in Fantastic Universe introduced this darkly humorous tale to a new generation of pulp readers. I am Tony Walker, the human narrator of the Classic Ghost Stories podcast, and I hope you enjoy this venture into humorous, amazing tales.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
Symposium of the Gorgon by Clark Ashton Smith. I do not remember where or with whom the evening had begun, nor can I recall what vintages, brews and distillations I had mingled by the way. In those nights of an alcoholically flaming youth, I was likely to start anywhere, drink anything, and end up anywhere else than at the port of embarkation. It was therefore with interest, but with little surprise, that I found myself among the guests at the symposium in the Gorgon's hall. Do not ask me how I got there. I'm still vague about it myself. It would be useless to tell you, even if I could, unless you are one of the rare few elected for similar adventures. And if you are one of those, the telling would be needless. Liquor brings oblivion to most, but to certain others, enfranchisement from time and space, the awareness of Tao, of all that is or has ever been or will ever be. By liquor, I mean, of course, the true essence, poured from the dive bouteille, but, on occasion, any bottle can be divine. Just why, at that particular time, after what must have been a round of mundane barrooms, I should have entered the mythologic palace of Medusa, is a matter hardly apparent, but determined, no doubt, by the archaic and inflexible logic of alcohol. The night had been foggy, not to say wet, and on such nights one is prone to stray into the unlikeliest places. It was not the first time I had gotten a little mixed up in regard to the Einsteinian continuum. Having read Bullfinch and other mythologists, I had small difficulty in orienting myself to the situation. At the moment of my entrance into the spacious early Grecian hall, I was stopped by a slave girl, attired only in 3 garlands of roses, arranged to display and enhance her charms. This girl presented me with a brightly polished silver mirror, the rim and handle of which were twined appropriately with graven serpents. She also gave me a capacious wine cup of unglazed clay. In a low voice, in the purest Greek of pre-Euripidean drama, she told me the mirror's purpose. The cup I could fill as often as I pleased, or was able, at the fountain of yellow wine in the foreground, rilling from the open mouth of a marble sea nymph that rose from amidst its bubbling ripples. Thus forewarned, I kept my eyes on the mirror, which reflected the room before me with admirable clearness. I saw that my fellow guests, at least any who possessed hands, had also been considerately equipped with mirrors in which they could look with safety at their hostess whenever politeness required. Medusa sat in a high-armed chair at the hall's centre, weeping constant tears that could not dim the terrible brightness of her eyes. A tonsure of curling serpents writhed and lifted incessantly. On each arm of the chair perched a woman-headed, woman-breasted fowl that I recognized as a harpy. In other chairs, the 2 sisters of Medusa sat immobile with lowered eyes. All 3 were draining frequent cups served with averted eyes by the slave girls, but showed no sign of intoxication. There seemed to be a lot of statuary about the place. Men, women, dogs, goats, and other animals, as well as birds. These, the first slave girl whispered as she passed me, consisted of the various unwary victims turned to stone by the Gorgon's glance. In a whisper lower still, She added that the fatal visit of Perseus coming to behead Medusa was momentarily expected. I felt that it was high time for a drink, and moved toward the verge of the vinous pool. A number of ducks and swans, standing unsteadily about it with wine-splashed plumage, dipped their beaks in the fluid and tilted their heads back with obvious relish. They hissed at me viciously as I stepped among them. I slipped on their wet droppings and plunged hastily into the pool, but still retained the cup and the mirror as well as my footing. The fluid was quite shallow. Amid the loud quacking of the startled birds and the giggling of several golden-tressed sirens and russet-haired nereids who sat on the farther edge, stirring the pool to luminous ripples with their cod-like tails, I stepped forward, splashing ankle-deep to the marbled sea-girl, and lifted my cup to the yellow stream that issued from her grinning mouth. The cup filled instantly and slopped over, drenching my shirt-front. I drained it at a gulp. The wine was strong and good, though tasting heavily of resin like other antique vintages. Before I could raise the cup for a second draught, it seemed that a flash of lightning, together with a violent wind, leapt horizontally across the hall from the open doorway. My face was fanned as if by the passing of a god. Forgetting the danger, I raised my eyes toward Medusa, over whom the lightning hovered and swung back with the movement of a weapon about to strike. I remember my mythology. It was indeed the sword of Perseus, who wore Mercury's winged shoes and a helmet loaned by Hades which made him invisible. Why the sword alone should be perceptible to sight, no myth-maker has explained. The sword fell, and the head of Medusa sprang from her seated body and rolled in a spatter of blood across the floor and into the pool where I stood petrified. It was a moment of pandemonium. The ducks and geese scattered, quacking, honking madly, and the sirens and nereids fled shrieking. They dropped their mirrors as they went. The head sank with a great splash, then rose to the surface. I caught a sidelong flick of one dreadful agonized eye, the left, as the head rolled over and soared from the water, its snaky locks caught in an unseen armored grip by the pursuing demigod. Then Perseus and his victim were gone, with a last lightning flash of the sword through the doorway where the nymphs had vanished. I climbed from the reddening pool, too dazed to wonder why I still retained a power of movement after meeting the Gorgon's eye. The slave girls had disappeared. The trunk of Medusa had fallen forward from its chair, upon which the harpies still perched. Beside Medusa stood a beautiful winged white horse, dabbled from hoofs to mane with the blood that still ran from the fallen monster's neck. I knew that it must be Pegasus, born of her decapitation according to myth. Pegasus pranced lightly toward me, neighing in excellent Greek. We must go. The decrees of the gods have been fulfilled. I see that you are a stranger from another time and space. I will take you wherever you wish to go, or as near to it as possible. Pegasus kneeled, and I mounted him bareback, since he had been born without saddle or reins. Cling tightly to my mane. I will not unhorse you, he promised, whatever the speed or altitude of our journey. He trotted out through the doorway, spread his shining wings on an orient dawn, and took off toward the reddening cirrus clouds. I turned my head a little later. An ocean lay behind us, far down, with raging billows turned to mere ripples by distance. The lands of morning gleamed before us. "To what period of time and what region?" asked Pegasus above the rhythmic drumming of his wings. "I come from a country known as America, in the 20th century A.D., I replied, raising my voice to reach his ears through the thunder. Pegasus bridled and almost stopped in mid-flight. "My prophetic insight forbids me to oblige you. I cannot visit the century, and in particular the country that you name. Any poets who are born there must do without me, must hoist themselves to inspiration by their own bootstraps, rather than by the steed of the muses. If I ventured to land there, I should be impounded at once and my wings clipped. Later, they would sell me for horse meat." You underrate their commercial acumen, I said. They'd put you in a sideshow and charge a stiff entrance fee. You're well known in a way. Your name and picture are on the sideboards at many gas stations, a synonym for speed, if nothing else. Anyway, there is little inducement for me to return. I have been trying to drink myself out of it for years and decades. Why end up, as I will sooner or later, at the highly expensive mercy of doctors, hospitals, and undertakers? You are certainly sensible. Will you indicate a place and period more to your liking? I mused a while, reviewing all I could remember of both history and geography. Well, I decided at last, some South Sea island might do, before the discovery by Captain Cook and the coming of the missionaries. Pegasus began to accelerate his flight. Day and darkness, shuttled by sun, moon, and stars, were streaks above, and the regions below were blurred by inconceivable speed, so that I could not distinguish fertile from desert, land from water. We must have circled the earth innumerable times through the birth and death of millenniums. Gradually, the speed of the winged horse decelerated. A cloudless sun became stable overhead. A balmy subtropic sea full of green islands rolled softly on all sides to the horizon. Pegasus made an easy landing on the nearest island, and I slipped dizzily from his back. "Good luck," he neighed. Then, stretching his wings once more, he soared toward the sun and disappeared with the suddenness of a time machine. Feeling that Pegasus had abandoned me in a rather summary fashion, I peered about at my surroundings. At first sight, I had been left on an uninhabited isle, on a coral reef lined with untrodden grass and rimmed with padanus and breadfruit trees. Presently the foliage stirred, and several natives crept forth. They were elaborately tattooed and armed with wooden clubs studded with shark's teeth. Judging from their gestures of fear and wonder, they had never seen a white man or a horse of any colour, winged or unwinged. They dropped their clubs as they neared me and pointed questioning fingers, a trifle shaky, at the skies where Pegasus had vanished. "Think nothing of it," I said in my suavest and most reassuring tones. Remembering a vague religious upbringing, I made the sign of benediction. The savages grinned shyly, displaying an array of filed teeth only less formidable than the shark's incisors and molars that decorated their clubs. Plainly, they were losing their fear and making me welcome to the island. Their eyes appraised me with inscrutable blandness, like those of innocent children who expect someone to feed them. I'm penciling this account in a small notebook found in one of my pockets. 3 weeks have passed since Pegasus left me among the cannibals. They've treated me well, and have fattened me with all the abundance that the isle offers, with taro and roast pig, with breadfruit, coconuts, guavas, and many unknown delicious vegetables. I feel like a Thanksgiving turkey. But how do I know they are cannibals? By human bones, hair, skin piled or strewn about as animal remnants are in the neighbourhood of slaughterhouses. Apparently, they have moved their feasting places only when the bones got too thick. Bones of men, women, children, mixed with those of birds, pigs, and small four-footed creatures. An untidy lot, even for anthropophagy. The island is of small extent, perhaps no more than a mile in width by 2 in length. I have not learned its name, and am uncertain to which of the many far-flung archipelagos it belongs, but I have picked up a few words of the soft, many-vowelled language, mainly the names of foodstuffs. They have domiciled me in a clean enough hut which I occupy alone. None of the women, who are comely enough and quite friendly, has offered to share it with me. Perhaps this is for therapeutic reasons. Perhaps they fear I might lose weight if I were to indulge in amorous activity. Anyway, I'm relieved. All women are cannibalistic, even if they don't literally tear the meat from one's bones. They devour time, money, attention, and give treachery in return. I have long learned to avoid them. Long ago, my devotion to drink became single-hearted. Liquor, at least, has been faithful to me. It requires no eloquence, no flattery, no blandishments. To me, at least, it makes no false promises. I wish Pegasus would return and carry me off again. Truly, I made a chuckle-headed choice in selecting one of the South Sea Islands. I'm weaponless, and I don't swim very well. The natives could overtake me quickly if I stole one of their outrigger canoes. I never was much good at boating, even in my college days. Barring a miracle, I am destined to line the gizzards of these savages. The last few days they have allowed me all the palm wine I can drink. Perhaps they believe it will improve the flavour. I swig it frequently and lie on my back staring at the bright blue skies where only parrots and seabirds pass. I cannot get drunk and delirious enough to imagine that any of them is the winged horse, and I curse them in 5 languages, in English, Greek, French, Spanish, Latin, because they cannot be mistaken for Pegasus. Perhaps if I had plenty of high-proof Scotch and bourbon, I could walk out of this particular time plexus into something quite different, as I did from modern New York into the ancient palace of Medusa. Another entry which I hardly expected to make. I don't know the day, the month, the year, the century, but, according to these misguided islanders, and mine, it was Pot Day. They brought out the pot at mid-morning, a huge vessel of blackening bartered bronze inscribed around the sides with Chinese characters. It must have been left here by some far-strayed or storm-wrecked junk. I don't like to conjecture the fate of the crew, if any survived and came ashore. Being boiled in their own cooking pot must have been a curious irony. To get back to my tale, the natives had set out huge quantities of palm wine in crude earthen vessels, and they and I were getting ginned up as fast as we could. I wanted a share of the funeral feast, even if I was slated to afford the pièce de résistance. Presently, there was a lot of jabbering and gesticulating. The chief, a big burly ruffian, was giving orders. A number of the natives scattered into the woods, and some returned with vessels full of spring water, which they emptied into the pot, while others piled dry grass and well-seasoned faggots around its base. A fire was started with flint and an old piece of metal which looked like the broken-off end of a Chinese sword blade. It was probably a relic of the same junk that had provided the pot. I hoped that the user had broken it only after laying out a long file of cannibals. In a rather futile attempt to raise my spirits, I began to sing the Marseillaise and followed it with Lulu and various other bawdies. Presently the water was bubbling, and the cooks turned their attention to me. They seized me, stripped off my ragged clothes, and trussed me up adroitly, knees to chest and arms doubled at the sides, with some sort of tough vegetable fibre. Then, singing what was doubtless a cannibal shanty, they picked me up and heaved me into the pot, where I landed with a splash and settled more or less upright in a sitting position. At least I'd thought they would knock me on the head beforehand, rather than boil me live like a lobster. In my natural fright and confusion, it took me some moments to realize that the water, which had seemed scalding hot, was in reality no warmer to the epidermis than my usual morning tub. In fact, it was quite agreeable. Judging by the violence with which it bubbled beneath my chin, it was not likely to grow much hotter. This anomaly of sensation puzzled me mightily. By all rights, I should be suffering agonies. Then, like a flash of lightning, I remembered the passing sidelong flick of Medusa's left eye and the apparent lack of effect at the time. Her glance had in no way petrified me, but in some strange fashion it must have toughened my skin, which was now impervious to the normal effects of heat, and perhaps also to other phenomena. Perhaps, to cause the mythic petrification, it was necessary to sustain the regard of both the Gorgon's eyes. These things are mysteries. Anyway, it was as if I had been given a flexible asbestos hide, but curiously enough, my keenness of touch was unimpaired. Through the veering smoke, I saw that the cooks were coming back laden with baskets of vegetables. They were all getting drunker, and the chief was the drunkest. He lurched about, waving his war club, while the others emptied their baskets into the kettle. Only then did they perceive that things had not proceeded according to culinary rules. Their eyes grew rounder, and they yelled with surprise to see me grinning at them from the steaming ebullient contents. One of the cooks made a pass at my throat with a stone knife, and the knife broke in the middle. Then the chief stepped forward, shouting ferociously, and hoisted his toothed war club. I ducked under the water into one side. The club descended, making a huge splash, and missed me. Judging from their outcries, some of the cooks must have been scalded by the flying water. The chief fared worse. Overbalanced by that mighty stroke, he lurched against the pot, which careened heavily, spilling much of the contents. Using my weight repeatedly against the side, I managed to overthrow the vessel and rolled out in a torrent of water, smoke, and vegetables. The chief, yowling from what must have been third-degree burns, was trying to extricate himself from the brands and embers into which he had fallen. Limping, he got to his feet after several vain attempts and staggered away. The other cooks and the expectant feasters had already decamped. I had the field to myself. Looking around, I noticed the broken-off sword which had been used in striking fire, and levered myself in its direction. Holding it clumsily, I contrived to work my wrist fetters against the edge. The blade was still fairly sharp, and I soon had my hands free. After that, it was no trick to untruss my legs. The wine had worn off, but there were many unemptied pots of it still around. I collected 2 or 3 and put some of the spilled vegetables to roast amid the glowing coals. Then, waiting comfortably for the cannibal's return, I began to laugh. I was washing down a well-baked taro root with the second pot of wine when the first of them crawled out of the woods and fell prostrate before me. I learned afterwards that they were deprecating my anger and were very sorry they had not recognized me as a god. They have christened me in their own tongue the one who cannot be cooked. I wish that Pegasus would return.
If you like that story, consider supporting me as a patron. That way you help me make more stories for you and get access to a patrons-only library of stories. Lots more hours for you to listen to.
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead come back?
So that was the Symposium of the Gorgon by Clark Ashton Smith, published in 1958. I thought I would maybe set out how I got to the Symposium of the Gorgon. So I'm a relatively spontaneous person, and so it was Sunday today, and after walking the dogs, Sheila had gone out to do one of her sound baths where you all lie down, and she's got these crystal bowls, and she soothes everybody with her skills. So I thought, well, Sunday I should really record a podcast. It'd take me all day to do it. First of all, I record it. Then I write the notes, research the notes, write the notes, narrate the notes, and I finally put all the sound files together and put them out on the different platforms. So it'll take me all day to do it. But it's fair enough. It's a Sunday. I've got nothing else to do. So it's a work day for me, really. Anyway, so, okay, how did I choose this particular story? Well, I'd been thinking for a while, we'd do a Clark Ashton Smith story. Now, this channel is called Classic Ghost Stories, but from the very beginning, perhaps I used to select more widely, but I'm kind of being bombarded a little bit with modern stories because of copyright issues. I've become much more aware of that, and so that's even when I'm talking about modern stories, I'm talking about sort of mid to late 20th century forward. They're becoming more difficult for me to do. I had done some with living authors. I do 1 or 2 of those, but the problem is there are so many people who want to be authors. You get deluged by people sending you the stories, and I haven't got a lot of time. So anyway, but going back to when I was saying about choosing relatively widely, I definitely saw a place for the pulp fiction, the amazing stories crowd in this. Particularly Lovecraft, but also Ashton Smith. When I was a teen, I preferred Ashton Smith to Lovecraft, and what I find is that of the story arcs of Lovecraft, I actually really like his fantasy stories. I think we did Through the Gates of the Silver Key, but the Dream Quest of Unknown Cadathan or things like this. I quite like his horror stuff, obviously, but that's my favourite. And Ashton Smith is more fantastical. I mean, I particularly like the Averoyne. I've done 1 or 2 of those, but I thought I'd try an Ashton Smith. It's not everybody's cup of tea. I know, I can do a Victorian ghost story, put a haunted house on the front, and that will go down like, a draft of ambrosia and honey and milk and all that kind of stuff. And I know, I did Huguenot's Wife, which was, we'll come back to that. Well, no, we won't. We'll just go forward with it now. And that has a picture of some kind of Greek mythical beast on the cover. So it gets like a fifth of the views. And people are, and maybe you should say, Tony, well, listen, if they want Victorian stories, just do Victorian stories. That's what people want. But I'm a restless soul, and I like to kind of curate things and look into things and present different things. So I ended up with Clark Ashton Smith. Now, Huguenot's Wife is a story set in Greece against a background of ancient Greek gods, if you haven't come across our ancient Greek religion. Now, there was a fantastic comment on that by somebody called Otto Pippinger, and he said, thank you for reminding me of the dead genre of Helleno-cosmic horror. And I thought, that's it. There is this subgenre, and there's not too many stories in it, but it's a definite thing of kind of horror stories or supernatural stories, or drawing on Greek mythology, and usually kind of disturbing Greek mythology. So I thought, yeah, Huguenot's Wife, I'm going to do another one. And so that coming together of Clark Ashton Smith, I wanted to do a Clark Ashton Smith. So here's me leafing through, and I see the Symposium with the Gorgon. I said, this sounds like Helleno-cosmic horror to me. And I wasn't familiar with the story, and I got a little bit into it. I thought, yeah, I'm going to do this one. It is this Helleno-cosmic horror, which is going to be the new folk. I'm only joking. I put a post up on the YouTube saying I was going to convert the whole channel to just do Greek and Roman cosmic horror, based in ancient Greece, in Latin and Greek, in the original languages, with no subtitles, because that's my kind of sense of humour. Now, I guarantee you, if you go to the comments, you will see people absolutely outraged at this, people unsubscribing and all sorts of stuff. Not everybody, but there will be people who do it, because, the internet is full of really literally minded people, and jokes are really hard to get across on the internet. You may argue it's not a particularly funny joke, and I would accept that criticism, but it was intended as a joke. So anyway, I'm not really going to convert it to Helleno-cosmic horror, but I think those of you who know me by now, you'll come along with me anyway. So I ended up doing this story, and as you get into it, first of all, there's a great streak of Puritanism in modern society, which actually I read an article showing its descent directly from the New England Puritans who escaped the decadent England to go to a place where they could be puritanical in their own way, and police everybody's views and not have any jokes on music or anything like that. And there is this kind of streak that's still prevalent in modern society, and one of the things they don't like is the glorification of drugs and alcohol. And he's kind of using alcohol in this story as it enables him to travel time and space, doesn't it, really? That's what he's saying. So what did I made a note about that. Okay. I actually looked into this and looked at the symbolism of alcohol, but what I'm saying is so they probably wouldn't like the glorification of alcohol. And I'm kind of going along with the story. And remember, I've already recorded a bit of it, and then, okay. And then we have him go to the island of the cannibals. I'm like, oh, no. Just imagine these some people who are of that bent. How you would analyse this story from modern critical race theory, for example, colonialist views, people being seen as savages and cannibals, and being used as, basically objects of fun, who then worship this presumably white saviour, explosion. But by this time, I've gone along with it, and I thought, yeah, it's just a joke. It didn't mean any harm. But no doubt, I will have to comment. I guarantee you will be comments saying, yes, it doesn't mean any harm, but it will be harmful. So bring them on. I think it's just a joke. I think we need to stand up for jokes. I think we need to stand up for not being totally serious about everything and taking everything with deadpan serious that everything is grave and sins must be punished. Even sins of jokes must be punished. You know, I'm getting old and I haven't got any time for that crap anymore. Anyway, Clark Ashton Smith, 1893-1961. He was born, he died the year I was born. But we shared some months on the planet together, as I did with Carl Jung. I was born in March, he died in June. I was born in March, Clark Ashton Smith died in August. I'm not sure you need to know that, but and it is of no consequence, it doesn't really mean anything. But so he was a highly influential American writer, poet, artist and sculptor. Although there are articles when I was doing this that talk about how he was massively underrated. I said when I've done Ashton Smith stories before, and I don't think it comes out massively in these notes I was doing now, is he deliberately talked about writing as an incantation. So we get Lovecraft's Baroque writing style, which is quite hard to understand, and throwing in words that you've never heard before, or you've heard, once or twice, maybe never, and apart from in Lovecraft stories. And we talked about why this might be, and I think him as an autodidact, that is a guy with no massively formal education, but yet taught himself and became intoxicated with long and obscure Latinate words. And Ashton Smith also uses this extended vocabulary of unusual words. Whereas I think Lovecraft, I may be wrong, I think Lovecraft was kind of doing it in a sense to show, I'm not stupid. I haven't got a college degree, but I'm not stupid. I know words. But Ashton Smith said that he was using, because he was a poet as well, so was Lovecraft to an extent, as incantations, so magical, not strictly occult magic, but in the sense of in magic, words are definitely used. I think the Golden Dawn have this phrase which is fantastic, which says, by words and images, or by names and images, are all powers awakened and reawakened. That's a fantastic saying. And so it is the power of words. Words, if you look at the runes, the word rune in Germanic, in Proto-Germanic, or there we are, means secret, So words have often, and if you've ever read Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea trilogy, there's more than 3 actually, she, by knowing the real name of something, you have power over it. And this is, of course, in fairy tales, to know a creature's real name gives you power over it. So it shows the human idea that words are magical. And I think Ashton Smith is using this in this way. He said he does. He uses words. Anyway, that's a very long kind of explication. Is that a word? Yeah, it is now. So, okay, so let me say something if you don't know anything about him. He's one of the big 3 of weird tales, including Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, of course, and Clark Ashton Smith. They're the weird tales big 3, the most popular writers. And we've done all of them on the podcast because, as I said, to repeat myself, there is a place for weird fiction in this podcast. So he was born in Long Valley, and I may get some of the names wrong, pronunciation, Placer County, California, and he spent most of his time in the small town of Auburn. He was a voracious reader with a remarkable memory, compensating for limited formal education by immersing himself in literature, encyclopedias and dictionaries. He taught himself French and Spanish to translate poetry, demonstrating an intellectual curiosity would deeply inform his writing. His own literary influences include Edgar Allan Poe. You can see that, don't you? The Arabian Nights, yes. The fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen and William Beckford's Vathek, a classic Gothic novel from the Gothic theme. And I think, that feeds into his work as well. At the age of 15, he encountered George Sterling's poem A Wine of Wizardry, which ignited his passion for poetry and led him to pursue a career as a poet. So he quickly gained recognition in California, and he was supported by George Sterling himself, who was his mentor. Ashton Smith published his first volume of poems, The Star Treader and Other Poems, in 1912, and he got international acclaim, comparisons to Keats and Shelley, and for a while he was moving among the literary circles of Ambrose Bierce and Jack London. But he had health problems, particularly psychological disorders, including crippling anxiety and agoraphobia, turned him into a recluse, really. Financial hardship made him turn back to writing, but this time, instead of poetry, he produces short fiction. He wrote over 100 stories between 1929 and 1934. So it's only 5 years. That's a lot of stories to write. Let me think about that. So that's 20 a year, isn't it? It's more than one a month. Hey, I'm impressed by my mathematics, my quick thinking there. So they were mainly in weird tales, but not this story. This was in, I'll come to the publication details of that, but it was in another one. And he was unwell. He supported himself and his parents through various manual labour jobs, including fruit picking and wood cutting, and he was an able cook and winemaker. He created paintings, drawings and sculptures, and his visual art often depicted scenes and characters from his stories. His personal relations were complex. He never married until late in life, but he was rumoured to have had many mistresses, including married women. His romantic relationships were reportedly numerous. If you see the pictures of him, he's not an unhandsome bloke. But between 1909 at least 1930, and he married Caroline Emily Jones Dorman in 1961 and moved to her home in Pacific Grove, California. Now, despite the title of his most famous poem, The Hashish Eater, there's no reliable evidence that Smith ever experimented with illicit drugs, but who knows, he might have done. He smoked tobacco, often through pipes and cigarettes, and enjoyed drinking wine, often homemade. And my notes suggest sometimes to excess. I think that's... his attitude to alcohol is shown in this story. It's a friend to him, you know. It's a friend to the character, isn't it? It's not shown in a negative light at all. So yeah, he's ornate and evocative prose, often... here we go, described as lapidary. I suppose that's from using stones to make artwork. And effusistic, I don't even know what that means. He employed a vast vocabulary, creating a unique reading experience. So his themes include mortality and decay, cosmic indifference in like Lovecraft's cosmic horror, the indifference of the vast and caring universe and the insignificance of humanity. And I've talked elsewhere about how this is the theme of it's the zeitgeist of the time, really, of the 20th century, and we talked about that at length. The futility of egotism, the punishment of hubris and dangers of unchecked ambition. Again, we see that in Lovecraft as well. Loss and nostalgia, power of the supernatural, magic, ancient gods and monstrous entities. He wrote stories in cycles around certain places. So Hyperborea, a lost continent from the Miocene epoch, Poseidonis, a remnant of Atlantis, Averoigne, a place in medieval France, and he made up Zothic, a dying earth in the far future. He was a part of the Lovecraft Circle, a group of writers who corresponded and influenced each other's work, and he maintained a close friendship with H.P. Lovecraft for 15 years through letters. I'm not sure they ever met, exchanging ideas, and somebody might know, but I don't think they did, and creating shared elements in their respective mythologies. He also corresponded with Robert E. Howard, creator famously of Conan the Barbarian, and the three, as you said, were the three cornerstones of Weird Tale. He had some health problems. He had a heart attack in 1953. This was before he married again. No, it wasn't. Yeah, he died in 61. What was the year he married? I think he maybe married. Yeah, no, he was 61 in 54. That's a confusion. So around that time, he's having heart attacks and stuff. 53 the year before, and then he got married in 54. He died in his sleep in August 61, and he was 68. That's not a bad innings, you know. What can you hope for? So he was massive influence on other writers. I don't know. I prepared notes on the Symposium of the Gorgon, but I also did something on the development of fantasy literature because I thought this has got an important, but maybe I haven't got time to do that, and I'll do that elsewhere, maybe separately. And also I was having a joke about Hellenic cosmic horror, but it's a real thing. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, let's draft a manifesto for Hellenic cosmic horror, and I fed in some stories that I thought met the bill, and asked it to pull out some others. So we came up with M.P. Shield, Huguenin's Wife. I fed it that. This one by Clark Ashton Smith. Vernon Lee. So Vernon Lee, we've done stories by her. The Wicked Voice, done many stories. Phantom Lover, Oak of Oakhurst. She wrote a lot of kind of travelogue-y type fiction, non-fiction, on classical landscapes. And I remember reading, before I knew anything about who she was, I was doing a course on psychology on the emotions, and we were talking about, I've said this many times, about how the ancients they personified the emotions as gods. So, and I've said it before, when you fall madly in love, you are possessed by Aphrodite. When you go to war, you're possessed by Mars or Ares, and the gods were seen as actually real influences like that. Well, she's right. I was doing this course on that, and she writes, I think it's in Italy, of coming to this ancient grove that had been a sacred grove, and just the mystical numinosity of the place, and so that's why I think she gets in. Arthur Machen, great god Pan, although it's not set in Greece. I really wanted them set in Greece and Italy, and then of course one of my favourite books from when I was a young man was John Fowles's The Magus, which is set in a Greek island. This Nicholas Earth goes to be an English teacher. I haven't read it, it's great. I read it I think at different times of life. So I think I was in my mid-20s, and I was probably in love at the time. And, it is a love story. It's a weird story. It's very Jungian. This probably led me into Jung as well. But John Fowles's The Magus. But then, many years later, when I was married in a stable relationship, I read it when we were in Greece, and it didn't grab me in the same way. And I thought, well, it's a young man's book, because it's full of the preoccupations of maybe young women as well, of falling in love, finding a partner, falling in love. And so it was absolutely compelling when I first read it. And then when I read it again, when I was older in a different place in my life, it didn't grab me in the same way. I've still got a copy of it. I haven't thrown it out. Now, that was a side thing, but it is very drenched in symbolism and the Greek gods and things like that. And so, we've created this, and I've become very enthralled by this. And I think, do you know what? A collection of... Because, let's look at the ideas. The setting is sacred but dangerous. Myth-soaked Delos, Eleusis, Delphi, Arcadia, Thessaly. They're not ruins, but this is what ChatGPT came up with, but liminal zones where the veil between the human and the divine is thin. Antiquity is alive but hostile to the modern subject. I like that. The divine is real but indifferent or monstrous. So this is a kind of the cosmic horror stuff. The Gorgon, Pan, Apollo, Dionysus. The Greek gods typically didn't care much about people, but they were... they could do if you were their favourite, but they were very capricious. They were very, they'd drop you, take you, drop you, end up killing you. They just were there for their amusement. So I thought, this is good. Myth is not an allegory, it's a breach in the rational order. When myth reasserts itself, it brings dreams home and metaphors. Oh, God, come on, Tony. Metamorphosis. Ovid's Metamorphosis is a great book as well. To awaken myth is to destabilise the real. That's good stuff, isn't it? Beauty and terror, indistinguishable, aesthetic excess, erotic magnetism. I'm getting a bit of Oscar Wilde here. A religious awe often accompanying the horror. But that's definitely Huguenin's wife. The ancient past is not over. It reasserts itself cyclically, traumatically. Doesn't it sound great? We need to just write a collection of classical cosmic horror. I think it would... we've got the kind of Cthulhu stuff from the 1920s in the modern world, but let's go back. I'm keen on that. Anyway, let's get back to the story. The Symposium of the Gorgon, 1958, was published in Fantastic Universe Science Fiction late in his career. Remember, he died in 61. And I think, could we postulate, at this time he wasn't taking himself so seriously. That's what I think. You don't have to get very far into it and you realise it's a joke. It's a satirical story. So let's talk about some of the key themes in it. First of all, the escapism and delusionment, actually portrayed in a relatively witty way. So this is... He's in New York. He's gone from bar to bar, as many of you may have done. And... he ends up in the bar of the Medusa. Medusa's sitting there, and it's this is what happens to him when he drinks. He ends up in extraordinary places. Has happened to us all if we've drunk. And so this is the escapism of the 20th century. He says, to drink himself out of the 20th century. And then Pegasus, of course, he says, we'll take you back home. So it's 20th century America, and Pegasus says, nah, you can't take me there, because basically they don't believe in myths anymore in Ashton Smith's period. What was it? They're going to turn him into horse meat. And then the narrator says, I think you doubt their commercial acumen. They'll use you as a marketing. It would be put on the internet, wouldn't he? He'd be making people money as a meme or as a brand or something like that. So I thought that was quite funny. Lots of grotesque and absurd. The Medusa's Hall, the drunk, it's silly, magnificent. It's like a fever dream, but also a bit scary. And there's Perseus coming in with his sword. Remember, he's invisible and it's all the Greek myth. And he's got the sword, and and he comes in and chops a head off. And then, of course, and if you look at the let's have a think about the craft of the story. I'm not going to say much about this, but what you've got is you have this story, yeah, and then the Gorgon looks at him left, and it's just, oh, okay, nothing happens. And then later in the end, it turns out to have been a key thing. So that was fantastic foreshadowing. This is a writer who knows how to write. He knows how to write a short story. So it's about a third of the way in, maybe a quarter of the way in, maybe a third of the way in. He gets the Gorgon, but it doesn't petrify him, as it should have done, because they're all looking at it through mirrors, aren't they? The Gorgon, Medusa. And then later on, it turns it was his salvation. There's probably something deeply Jungian in that. But I've done a lot of Jung recently. It's about the dragon and the treasure, isn't it? And if you risk the dragon to find the treasure, you find out the dragon wasn't as bad as you thought. And actually, that poisoning by the dragon was actually helpful. Let's not go into that. So, I thought it was funny. What do we say more about alcohol? He talks about the archaic and inflexible logic of alcohol. So I think it's very light-hearted. I think at this point in his life, he would have been a really fun guy to know. I think he wasn't taking himself or his work too seriously. He liked a moderate drink. He wasn't puritanical about things, and he'd probably been a really easygoing fella. To at this point in his life, maybe in all of his life, but certainly I get that from in his later life there. Anyway, I've talked about Heleno, cosmic horror, and how I'm going to do that. I've talked about, briefly about the Symposium of the Gorgon. It's a relatively short story, but maybe more to say about it, but I'm probably going to leave it there. I was going to say something about its place in the development of fantasy literature, and I'm inclined to do that, but I tell you what, it's a long bit, and one of the dangers I have is because my mind skips. I don't do justice to things, so sometimes you skip like a stone over the water, and you touch. Belgian, the Belgian poet. What was that name? Otto Pippinger mentions him again. Jean Ray. The Belgian Poe, with his stories, and what's that book? Bruges les Morts, Bruges the Dead. That's a great book. Who wrote that? I'm going to have to stop. It's actually feminine. Bruges la Mort by Georges Rodenbach, a Belgian guy, and great book. So there we go. So my point is, we've skipped over all these things. Belgian fantasy is a whole episode in itself, isn't it? As is the development of fantasy fiction. That's probably about 6 episodes. As is, the role of alcohol. As is Hellenic themes in cosmic horror. And the danger is I skip over them too fast. So I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully I've given you some things to think about that you may have not thought about before. And that's what I'm all about.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come